She arrived at the grand mansion early in the morning, the sun barely rising above the horizon. Her uniform was simple, her shoes slightly worn, but her posture was straight, and her eyes were alert. She knew the day would be long, but she welcomed it. She always did. The mansion, with its tall pillars, shiny marble floors, and expansive gardens, could feel intimidating to anyone. Yet, to her, it was just a place where she had work to do and lives to touch in small ways each day. The staff had already started their routines. The cook was humming quietly in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for the morning meal. The gardeners were tending to the roses, their hands careful as they pruned each stem. The housekeepers moved with practiced efficiency, dusting and polishing, making sure everything sparkled. She fit right in, not because she had to, but because she had always respected the rhythm of hard work and quiet service. She was a maid here, but that was not the only thing she was. She had dreams, she had stories, and she had a heart that noticed things others ignored. She remembered the first day she had stepped into the mansion, feeling both awe and nervousness. She had been young, inexperienced, unsure if she could meet the expectations. But she had learned quickly. She had learned to be observant, to anticipate needs before they were spoken, and to act with kindness, even when no one was watching. The grandson, the only child of the billionaire, was still in his room, probably grumbling about the breakfast being late or thinking about the business meetings ahead. He had never really noticed her much. To him, she was just part of the background, someone who cleaned and served. That assumption was natural for him. She did not mind. It was easier that way. She did not need validation. She worked for the satisfaction of doing things well. As she carried the breakfast tray up the polished staircase, she noticed the small details that made her work meaningful. The grandfather always liked his tea exactly a certain temperature. The silver cutlery had to be aligned perfectly, and the tablecloth had to be free of wrinkles. She remembered these little things not because she was asked to, but because she cared. It was in these small attentions that she found her dignity. She passed by the large windows, sunlight streaming through, casting warm patterns on the floor. The mansion was quiet at this hour, peaceful in a way that only came before the world fully woke up. She smiled slightly, thinking about the old grandfather. He was a man of few words, stern in his ways, but he had an eye for people. Somehow he saw what others did not. He had noticed her from the beginning, though he never said much. She did not know if it was curiosity, respect, or something else entirely. It did not matter. She just did her work, quietly and with care. As she reached the breakfast room, she carefully arranged the tray. The grandson appeared, still in his robe, looking half awake and slightly irritated. He barely glanced at her, assuming she had done her job because that was what maids did. He did not know, and perhaps he never would, that she had memorized the exact way he liked his toast, the exact number of sugar cubes for his tea, the way he liked his napkin folded. Small things to him, but to her, they were her way of showing respect and skill. She placed the tray gently on the table and stepped back, offering a soft, polite greeting. He mumbled something, barely audible, then picked up his cup of tea. She nodded slightly and turned to leave. It was a small interaction, almost invisible, but it was part of the daily rhythm. The grandson never noticed the care behind her actions. He never noticed the little smiles she shared with other staff, the way she quietly corrected a mistake in the kitchen without making anyone feel embarrassed, or how she would take a moment to comfort the gardener when his back hurt from bending over the plants for hours. Her day continued with the same steady pace. She moved from room to room, dusting, polishing, arranging flowers, and making sure everything was in perfect order. She was aware of the footsteps echoing behind her, the distant sound of the grandfather walking down the hallway, the soft click of the grandson's shoes on the marble floor. She was aware of everything, but she remained calm, focused on her work, finding joy in the tasks themselves. There was a moment when the grandson accidentally dropped a document he had been carrying. It scattered across the floor, papers flying in all directions. He cursed under his breath, frustrated, and bent down to pick them up. She stepped forward immediately, helping him gather the papers without hesitation. She did not expect thanks, and indeed she received none. He simply muttered an annoyed thanks and went back to his room. Still, she did not feel slighted. Helping others was its own reward. Later in the afternoon, she was in the garden, watering the flowers and tending to the delicate roses. The grandfather walked past, observing her silently. He stopped for a moment, looking at her hands in the soil, the gentle way she handled the plants, and the concentration in her eyes. He did not speak, but in that quiet observation he recognized something. She had a dedication and a presence that could not be taught. She had a heart that noticed and a mind that understood, even if she said very little. The grandson came outside to join her, complaining about a phone call he had received. He sat on a bench, throwing his shoes slightly to the side, and started scrolling on his device. She kept working, careful not to disturb him but still listening. Occasionally, he would glance at her, seeing her only as a maid, as someone who existed to serve and be unseen. Little did he know that the grandfather had already seen her differently, had noticed her intelligence, patience, and kind spirit. The grandson's assumptions were natural, but they were also wrong. She remembered a conversation with the cook earlier in the week. The cook had said, "You know, it's rare to find someone who works with such quiet grace. Most people want recognition, but you don't. You just do what's right." She had smiled politely, acknowledging the compliment, but she did not dwell on it. It was her nature to do her work quietly, without fanfare, but those who noticed were beginning to see her worth. As the sun began to lower in the sky, she continued her tasks. The mansion started to settle into the evening rhythm. The grandson left for a meeting in the city, the grandfather retreated to his study, and the house became quiet again. She moved from room to room, adjusting curtains, checking that lights were off, and making sure everything was ready for the night. Her day was long, but she felt a quiet satisfaction. She had done her best, as always. There was a small moment of reflection. She thought about her life outside the mansion, her family, and her hopes for the future. She wondered if one day, people would see her for more than just her role here. She wondered if the grandson would ever notice the person behind the uniform. For now, she focused on the present, on the work that needed to be done, on the quiet impact she could make each day. The grandfather watched from the study window as she adjusted the cushions on the sofa, the way she moved with care and attention. He had his reasons for keeping silent, for letting the world see only her role as a maid. But he also knew that one day her patience, intelligence, and kindness would matter in ways that no one could imagine. He had made decisions in the past based on appearances and assumptions, but she was different. She had something rare, something valuable that went beyond wealth, status, or titles. Night fell, and the mansion grew dark, except for the warm lights in a few rooms. She finished her last tasks, locked doors, and made sure everything was in order. Her day was complete, yet it was never really over. She knew there would be another sunrise, another day of work, another chance to quietly make a difference. And somewhere in the quiet of the mansion, the grandfather reflected on what he had seen. He thought about the grandson, about the assumptions he made, and about the maid who carried herself with dignity, intelligence, and heart. He smiled slightly, knowing that the story was far from over, that the next chapter would reveal truths that would surprise even the most skeptical eyes. For now, he simply watched and waited, confident that she was more than anyone had ever realized, even herself. The morning light spilled into the mansion once again, and she moved quietly through the rooms, just as she had done countless times before. Today, however, there was something different in the air, though no one said a word about it. She could not see it clearly, but the feeling of anticipation seemed to hang softly over the halls, as if the house itself were waiting for something to happen. She started with the kitchen, preparing breakfast with careful attention. The cook greeted her with a warm smile, whispering a small compliment about her efficiency. She smiled back, her eyes calm, her movements steady. She knew she was appreciated by some, but the world at large still saw her as a maid, and that was fine. She did not seek recognition. What mattered was the small impact she could make quietly, the way a gentle breeze touches everything without making a sound. Later, she entered the library to dust the shelves. The grandson was there, sitting behind a large desk, papers spread before him. He barely looked up when she walked in. She had noticed it before. He assumed she was just part of the furniture, something permanent and unimportant. It did not bother her. She moved around carefully, wiping the dust from the shelves and arranging books. She knew exactly where each one belonged, and she did it with care because the library was special. The grandfather had spent a lifetime collecting these books, and she respected that. Every object, every corner of the mansion, had a story, and she treated each with gentle attention. While she worked, she overheard the grandson muttering under his breath about a difficult business decision. She did not intervene. That was not her role. But she listened quietly, and when he sighed heavily and seemed frustrated, she placed a small cup of tea at his desk without a word. He glanced up, slightly startled, and muttered a short thanks, barely acknowledging the gesture. She simply nodded and continued her work, satisfied with the silent communication. Sometimes, small acts of kindness could speak louder than words. The grandfather appeared in the library a few moments later. He watched her, his expression calm but thoughtful. She noticed his gaze, though she did not let it distract her. He had always observed her quietly, noticing the details in her work, her patience, and her quiet strength. Today, he smiled faintly, as if he had seen something particularly pleasing. It was subtle, but she felt the warmth behind it. She did not know exactly what he was thinking, and she did not need to. She simply continued her tasks with care and dedication. In the garden, she met the gardener, who was struggling to lift a heavy pot. She stepped forward, offering to help without a word. Together, they moved the pot to the desired spot, arranging the flowers with precision. The gardener thanked her softly, and she nodded, brushing dirt from her hands. It was part of her day, part of the quiet rhythm she had found here. Every action, no matter how small, mattered to her. Every life she touched, even in the simplest ways, was meaningful. As the day progressed, she found herself in the sitting room, arranging flowers in vases and straightening cushions. The grandson returned from a meeting, still wearing a tired expression, clearly frustrated by the challenges of the day. He barely noticed her, but she did not mind. She worked quietly, focusing on her tasks. She noticed the way he slumped into the sofa, the tension in his shoulders, the distant look in his eyes. She did not comment. She simply continued her work, offering silent support through presence alone. Later, the grandfather called her to the study. She approached respectfully, curious but composed. He had a small task for her, something unusual. He wanted her to organize a collection of letters and documents, some very old, some fragile. She handled them carefully, knowing their value and their importance. As she worked, the grandfather watched her, noting her attention to detail and the care with which she treated each piece. She was thorough, patient, and careful, qualities that went far beyond what anyone might expect from someone in her position. The grandson entered the study unexpectedly, interrupting her work. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time, and he saw something that surprised him. He saw focus, intelligence, and care. He saw someone who had thought about details he had never noticed. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that she was not just a maid. She was observant, capable, and thoughtful. He did not know how to react. He had never considered that someone like her could have such depth. Throughout the afternoon, more small moments revealed her character. She helped the housekeeper organize supplies, suggesting better ways to store items for efficiency. She offered advice on the best care for delicate plants, sharing knowledge that came from experience and observation. She listened to the gardener's concerns, offering encouragement without condescension. Each interaction was natural, kind, and effective. She did not seek credit, yet people noticed. The grandfather certainly did. He saw the way she moved through the day, the way she influenced those around her, and he made a quiet decision in his mind. As the day turned to evening, she continued her work, polishing silverware, arranging the dining table, and checking that everything was in order. The grandson watched her from a distance, still surprised by what he had seen. He felt a twinge of guilt for his earlier assumptions. He had underestimated her, and now he could not ignore her capabilities. He was learning, slowly, that appearances were misleading and that value could be hidden where he least expected it. The grandfather came to her side, walking through the dining room. He spoke softly, almost to himself, but in a way that she could hear. He praised her for her work, for her attention to detail, and for her quiet wisdom. She nodded politely, acknowledging his words without pride. To her, the praise was not necessary. Her work was its own reward. Yet, she felt a warmth, a sense of recognition that went beyond ordinary compliments. She knew he saw her not just as a maid, but as a person of worth, capable of much more than anyone realized. As night approached, the household began to settle. The grandson retired to his room, still thoughtful, while the grandfather returned to his study, satisfied with the observations of the day. She moved through the mansion one last time, checking that lights were off, windows were secure, and everything was in order. She paused for a moment by the grand staircase, reflecting on the day. Small victories, quiet observations, and subtle recognition had marked the hours. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had worked with care, had influenced those around her positively, and had earned a quiet respect that was more valuable than any words. The grandfather watched from his study window as she finished her rounds. He saw her walk with dignity, her eyes calm, her movements deliberate. He thought about the grandson, about how limited his understanding had been, and about how one person could quietly change the perspective of others simply by being consistent, thoughtful, and kind. The day had shown him what he needed to see. She was extraordinary, even in ways that the world might not recognize immediately. Later, in the quiet of the evening, she sat briefly in the kitchen, sipping a small cup of tea she had made for herself. She thought about the family, about the mansion, and about the quiet impact she had made throughout the day. She smiled softly, realizing that her presence mattered, even if it was unnoticed by some. The grandson had begun to notice in small ways. The staff had already seen her worth, and the grandfather had recognized her fully. She felt a sense of calm, a sense that she was exactly where she was meant to be. As she prepared to leave for the night, she reflected on the lessons of the day. She understood that true value was often hidden, that people were frequently judged too quickly, and that kindness, intelligence, and patience were powerful tools. She knew her work was not glamorous, but it was meaningful. She knew that, quietly, she had begun to change perceptions, to influence the people around her, and to plant the seeds of recognition that would grow in their own time. She left the mansion, closing the door gently behind her, feeling the cool night air on her face. The stars shone brightly, a quiet reminder that even in darkness, light could be found. She walked home slowly, reflecting on the day, her heart calm, her mind alert. She knew that tomorrow would bring new tasks, new challenges, and new opportunities to make a difference. And she welcomed it, as she always did, ready to continue her quiet journey of influence and integrity in the grand mansion she called her workplace. The morning began like any other, but there was a subtle tension in the mansion that no one could quite explain. She moved quietly through the hallways, her movements calm, precise, and attentive. She had learned over the years that observing details often revealed more than words ever could. The grandfather had been in his study since dawn, and the grandson had already stormed past her in a hurry, muttering about meetings and paperwork. To her, it was just another day. Yet, she could feel that something was shifting, as though the rhythm of the house had changed slightly. As she prepared breakfast, the grandson's phone rang continuously. He paced the dining room, answering calls and making decisions, clearly frustrated by the complexity of his work. She noticed the tension in his shoulders, the sharpness in his voice, and the way his fingers drummed impatiently on the table. Without saying a word, she set out a small cup of tea for him, just the way he liked it, placing it within reach. He glanced at her briefly, irritation mixed with surprise on his face, and muttered a distracted thanks. She smiled faintly, returning to her tasks, knowing that sometimes gestures spoke louder than conversations. Later, a problem arose that no one had anticipated. An important shipment of documents had gone missing, and the household was thrown into a mild panic. The staff scurried around, trying to figure out what had happened. The grandson was frustrated, pacing back and forth, blaming everyone without considering solutions. The grandfather, calm as ever, observed quietly from his study. She had noticed the disturbance, and without hesitation, she began helping to search. She retraced the steps of the delivery, asked discreet questions of the staff, and paid attention to small clues that others overlooked. Her diligence paid off. Within a short time, she found the missing documents hidden behind a stack of papers in the library. She did not announce it with fanfare. Instead, she approached the grandson quietly, placing the documents in his hands. He looked at her, eyes wide with disbelief. "You found these?" he asked, a hint of doubt in his voice. She nodded politely, a small, confident smile playing on her lips. "Yes," she said softly. "They were here all along." He could hardly believe it. All this time, he had assumed she was just a maid, incapable of contributing in meaningful ways beyond her daily chores. Now he saw her intelligence, her attention to detail, and her ability to remain calm under pressure. He began to realize that he had been wrong. He had underestimated her completely. The grandfather, who had watched the situation unfold from his study, allowed himself a quiet smile. He had known from the beginning that she was more than she appeared. Her patience, her insight, and her integrity were qualities that could not be taught. He had been observing, waiting for a moment that would reveal her capabilities. Today had provided that, and he knew that her place in the household and perhaps in the family itself would need to be reconsidered. The rest of the day continued with subtle but telling interactions. She assisted the grandson with organizing the recovered documents, offering practical suggestions on filing and categorization. He followed her advice reluctantly at first, but soon he realized that her methods were efficient and effective. It was a humbling experience for him. He had always assumed he knew best, yet here was someone he had dismissed, guiding him in ways he had never imagined. He began to pay closer attention to her, watching not only what she did but how she thought and acted. As the afternoon sun filtered through the windows, she moved through the mansion completing her chores, her demeanor calm and composed. The household staff started to notice her influence. The housekeeper followed her lead in organizing the cleaning supplies. The gardener listened attentively as she suggested ways to protect the delicate flowers from pests, and even the cook accepted her advice on kitchen efficiency. Each small act of competence built upon the last, and the mansion seemed to hum with a quiet sense of order and respect. She had a presence that encouraged others to do better, without demanding recognition or control. Meanwhile, the grandson struggled with mixed feelings. Part of him was embarrassed for having underestimated her for so long. Another part of him was fascinated by the realization that she had quietly mastered skills he had never considered. He could not ignore the fact that she had handled a delicate situation that he had thought required his own expertise. It was an uncomfortable truth, but it was also a lesson he could not unlearn. For the first time, he began to see her as an individual of substance, not just as someone whose role was to serve. The grandfather, observing all of this, felt a growing sense of satisfaction. He had known from the start that her value extended far beyond her position as a maid. Her intelligence, her kindness, and her steady composure were rare qualities. He had been patient, waiting for circumstances that would reveal her true worth to those around her. Now, the grandson was beginning to understand what he had missed, even if only in small measures. Later, an unexpected visitor arrived, someone from the family's business circle. The guest had specific questions about the documents that had gone missing and seemed ready to complain about the delay. She stepped forward confidently, presenting the recovered documents and answering questions politely and accurately. The guest was impressed by her knowledge and clarity, clearly expecting someone far more formal or official. The grandfather watched silently, pleased with how naturally she handled the interaction. The grandson, on the other hand, was astonished. He had never imagined that someone in her position could command such respect and provide accurate information without hesitation. As evening approached, She continued her work, attending to small household tasks that required attention but little fanfare. She checked the rooms, straightened furniture, and ensured everything was ready for the night. Her quiet diligence contrasted sharply with the earlier chaos, highlighting the steady influence she had on the mansion's atmosphere. She did not seek praise, but it was evident that her presence had improved the efficiency and harmony of the household. The grandson finally spoke to her privately, a rare moment of direct interaction. He asked about her methods, curious how she had managed to handle the situation so calmly and effectively. She explained briefly, focusing on careful observation, attention to detail, and remaining patient under pressure. He listened, genuinely intrigued, and for the first time he felt a sense of respect rather than condescension. He was beginning to understand that his assumptions had been misguided, and that he had much to learn from someone he had overlooked. The grandfather, watching from a distance, knew that the lessons were unfolding exactly as he had hoped. She had revealed her intelligence, her competence, and her quiet strength in ways that no one could ignore. The grandson's perspective was shifting, slowly but surely, and the household was beginning to see her as more than a maid. She had achieved this without any assertion or demand, simply through consistent excellence and integrity. That night, as the mansion settled into quiet, she reflected on the day. She thought about the challenges she had faced, the small victories, and the lessons learned. She felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had managed to navigate a complex situation with patience and skill. She also recognized that the journey was far from over. The grandson's perception of her was changing, but there was still much work to be done to earn his full understanding and respect. The grandfather retired to his study with a quiet smile. He thought about the day's events and the way she had handled herself. He knew that her abilities extended beyond what had been revealed today. There was a depth of character, intelligence, and compassion that could not be measured simply by one day's actions. He was confident that she would continue to demonstrate her value in ways that would surprise and impress even the most skeptical members of the household. Meanwhile, the grandson sat in his room, thinking about the events of the day. He felt a mixture of embarrassment, awe, and curiosity. He had been wrong about her, and he knew it. For the first time, he considered that people could have hidden depths, capabilities, and intelligence that were not immediately visible. He realized that he had much to learn, and that he had underestimated someone who had quietly proven her worth under challenging circumstances. Outside, the night air was cool and still. She walked home slowly, reflecting on the quiet accomplishments of the day. She felt a sense of satisfaction in knowing that she had acted with integrity, intelligence, and calmness, and that her actions had begun to shift perceptions. She knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and perhaps new revelations. Yet she was ready, as always, to continue her work with patience, care, and quiet dignity. The mansion, now quiet and orderly, seemed to rest in the calm that her influence had brought. The grandfather was confident that her journey was only beginning, that her potential was vast, and that the household would continue to recognize her worth in ways both small and profound. The grandson, slowly awakening to the truth, began to understand that he had misjudged her, and that true value often lay hidden beneath the surface. And so, as the stars appeared in the night sky, she carried herself home with calm confidence. She knew that each day brought the possibility of being noticed, of making a difference, and of quietly proving that she was far more than anyone had imagined. The mansion would continue to witness her growth, her intelligence, and her heart, and the story of her quiet power was only beginning to unfold. The morning sun broke through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the grand mansion. She moved through the rooms with her usual calm and focus, carrying out her tasks with careful attention. Today felt different, though she could not immediately say why. There was a sense of quiet importance in the air, as if the house itself was holding its breath. She continued her work, folding linens, dusting shelves, and arranging flowers, unaware that today would mark a turning point in her life. The grandfather, as always, had been observing quietly. He had watched her for years, noting her patience, intelligence, and integrity. Today, however, he had made a decision. He had considered all the ways she had quietly influenced the household, how she had handled difficult situations with grace, and how her presence had shifted perspectives without ever demanding recognition. He knew it was time to take an action that would change everything. The grandson entered the breakfast room, still tired from a sleepless night worrying about business matters. He barely noticed her as she placed the tray on the table, his eyes focused on his phone. She moved carefully, setting everything exactly as he liked it, her movements quiet and precise. He muttered a distracted thanks and continued scrolling. She did not mind. She was used to his inattention. Her satisfaction came from doing her work well, regardless of whether he acknowledged it. After breakfast, the grandfather called her to the study. She approached with a mixture of curiosity and composure, knowing that any task from him would be important. As she entered the room, she saw the serious expression on his face. He gestured for her to sit, and she did so politely, waiting for him to speak. He began to speak slowly, choosing his words carefully. He praised her for her dedication, her intelligence, and her quiet influence on the household. He recounted the many ways she had demonstrated her capability, from solving small problems that others overlooked to handling delicate situations with discretion and wisdom. She listened respectfully, nodding, understanding that his words carried weight beyond simple compliments. The grandson entered the study unexpectedly, curiosity and confusion on his face. He had been drawn by the unusual tone in his grandfather's voice. He looked at her, noticing for the first time the calm confidence she carried. He had begun to realize that she was not just a maid, but someone with depth, intelligence, and a strong sense of purpose. He watched her, trying to reconcile the image he had held for so long with the reality before him. The grandfather continued, explaining that he had made a significant decision regarding his will and the family inheritance. He revealed that he intended to include her as a beneficiary, acknowledging her contributions and recognizing the rare qualities she possessed. The room was filled with a stunned silence. She blinked, processing the information, unable at first to believe what she was hearing. The grandson's eyes widened, a mix of shock, disbelief, and confusion reflecting on his face. She found her voice, calm but steady, and expressed her gratitude, emphasizing that her work had always been motivated by care and integrity, not the expectation of reward. The grandfather nodded, acknowledging her humility, and explained that it was precisely her character that had inspired this decision. He had watched her for years, and her consistent display of patience, intelligence, and kindness had earned her this recognition. It was a reward not for her role, but for the person she had proven herself to be. The grandson struggled to find words. He had spent so long assuming she was just a maid, that her only role was to serve. Now he was confronted with the reality that he had been entirely wrong. He realized that she had quietly demonstrated qualities that he had never possessed, managing challenges with grace and solving problems he could not. His assumptions crumbled, replaced by a growing respect and a sense of humility. As the day continued, she was asked to join the family for a private meeting. The grandfather wanted her input on certain matters, valuing her perspective. She offered thoughtful and insightful suggestions, showing a depth of understanding that surprised even the grandson. Each word, each idea she shared carried weight. The household staff watched in quiet amazement as she engaged with the family in ways they had never seen before. She spoke with clarity and confidence, earning recognition naturally through her actions and wisdom. Later, the grandson reflected on the day, feeling a mixture of awe, embarrassment, and newfound respect. He realized that he had underestimated her for years, overlooking the qualities that made her extraordinary. He began to understand that intelligence, patience, and empathy were not defined by title or status, and that true value could be found in unexpected places. The realization was humbling, and he knew he had much to learn from her example. The grandfather, observing the interactions, felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had been patient, knowing that recognition would come in its own time. She had proven herself consistently, and today had solidified the truth that he had known all along. Her influence, her character, and her wisdom were undeniable, and the decision to include her in the inheritance was both fair and meaningful. He had seen her impact the household quietly, transforming it through diligence, kindness, and intelligence, and now the world would officially acknowledge her worth. As evening approached, she moved through the mansion, completing her daily tasks with her usual calm efficiency. The grandson watched, no longer seeing her as merely a maid, but as someone capable, intelligent, and deserving of respect. He began to observe her actions more closely, noticing the small ways she maintained harmony, efficiency, and care throughout the household. He recognized that her presence had been valuable long before the grandfather's announcement, and he felt a sense of gratitude mixed with humility. That night, she sat quietly in her room, reflecting on the events of the day. She felt a mixture of surprise, gratitude, and quiet satisfaction. Her life had shifted in a way she had never anticipated, yet she approached it with the same calm and thoughtful nature that had always guided her. She understood that the inheritance was more than material. It was recognition of her integrity, intelligence, and unwavering commitment to doing what was right. The grandson, in his own room, contemplated the lessons he had learned. He understood that assumptions and judgments based on appearances were flawed, and that true worth was often revealed quietly over time. He felt a newfound respect for her and realized that the mansion, the family, and even his own understanding had been changed by her presence. The day had opened his eyes to the depth of character and intelligence that could exist where he had never expected it. The grandfather retired to his study, content with the unfolding of events. He had witnessed the unveiling of a truth that had been quietly present for years. She had proven herself through consistent actions, thoughtful decisions, and a calm, intelligent presence. He knew that her inclusion in the inheritance was a reflection not only of her contributions but of the rare and valuable qualities she embodied. Outside, the night sky was clear, and the mansion rested in quiet peace. She stepped onto the veranda for a moment, breathing in the cool air, feeling the weight and promise of the day. The world had recognized her in a tangible way, yet she remained grounded, focused on the work she loved and the integrity she valued. Her journey was not defined by status or recognition, but by her consistent choices and the quiet strength of her character. The grandson, reflecting on the day's revelations, felt a renewed sense of respect and understanding. He realized that the world was larger, more complex, and more surprising than he had assumed. His perception of her, and of what it meant to value someone, had been forever changed. He understood that recognition was not about position, but about qualities that transcended role and expectation. And so, as the mansion settled into the calm of night, she prepared for rest, carrying with her the knowledge that her integrity, intelligence, and quiet diligence had been acknowledged in ways that mattered. The grandfather felt satisfaction, the grandson felt humility and respect, and the household was beginning to see the extraordinary qualities of someone they had long overlooked. The day had marked a turning point, a recognition of hidden worth, and the promise of a future shaped by character, patience, and quiet wisdom. The morning light poured into the mansion, filling the rooms with a soft warmth. Today was not like the others. There was a quiet excitement in the air, even though no one spoke of it. She moved through the hallways with calm confidence, her steps measured, her thoughts clear. She had completed her work diligently for years, but today was different. The recognition she had received from the grandfather and the awareness in the grandson's eyes had shifted the atmosphere of the household. She carried herself with dignity, yet without pride, as she went about her tasks. The grandson approached her quietly as she polished the dining table. He stopped for a moment, looking at her in a new light. His eyes reflected humility and respect, emotions he had not felt toward her before. He spoke softly, asking for her opinion on organizing the upcoming family gathering. She shared her thoughts, practical and considerate, showing the same calm intelligence that had impressed him before. He listened attentively, realizing that her advice was not only helpful but insightful in ways he had never expected. The grandfather observed from the study, pleased with the interaction. He had seen the transformation over the past days, how the grandson's attitude had shifted, and how the household had begun to acknowledge her value. Her quiet influence had created harmony, efficiency, and respect. Today, her presence seemed to radiate calm authority, not because she demanded it, but because her integrity and intelligence naturally commanded it. As the day progressed, she was included in conversations she had never been part of before. She offered suggestions on the household organization, shared ideas for improvements, and participated in discussions with the family and staff. Her words carried weight, and those around her began to understand the depth of her knowledge and her ability to handle responsibility with grace. The grandson observed quietly, learning how to listen, how to value others' insights, and how to let go of old assumptions. Later, she was asked to assist in planning a small charity initiative that the family had long supported. She approached the task with care, considering both practical details and the needs of the people who would benefit. Her perspective was fresh, thoughtful, and empathetic. She suggested ways to make the initiative more effective and inclusive, showing not only intelligence but compassion. The grandfather nodded approvingly, while the grandson realized that her contributions went beyond household management. She had a rare ability to see the bigger picture and understand human needs. Throughout the afternoon, she continued her work, balancing household tasks with her new responsibilities. She moved gracefully between roles, never seeking credit, always focused on doing what was right. The staff began to notice subtle changes in their own behavior, inspired by her calm competence. The housekeeper followed her lead in managing supplies efficiently, the gardener adopted her suggestions for plant care, and even the cook listened attentively to her advice on organizing kitchen tasks. Her influence was quiet but pervasive, creating a sense of order and harmony that touched everyone. The grandson, reflecting on the day, felt a mixture of admiration and humility. He realized how much he had underestimated her and how his assumptions had been entirely misguided. Her intelligence, patience, and kindness had quietly transformed the household, and he now understood the value of observing and respecting others before judging them. He approached her later in the day, expressing sincere gratitude for her guidance and acknowledging the lessons he had learned from her example. As evening approached, the grandfather gathered the family and staff in the main hall. He spoke briefly about the importance of recognizing true value, the impact of integrity, and the qualities that made people deserving of respect and trust. He highlighted her contributions, not only in managing the household, but in inspiring those around her, and in shaping a more harmonious and thoughtful environment. The room was filled with quiet admiration, and she accepted the acknowledgement with humility, her calm demeanor reflecting the inner strength that had earned her such recognition. The grandson, standing nearby, felt a shift within himself. He had learned an important lesson about humility, judgment, and appreciation. He realized that leadership and influence were not about status or position, but about character, intelligence, and the quiet ability to make a positive difference. He looked at her with respect, understanding that her impact had gone far beyond what he had ever imagined. Later, as she moved through the mansion completing her evening tasks, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the years of quiet work, the small acts of care, and the patience she had maintained in the face of assumptions and oversight. She understood that recognition was not the goal, but that her consistent dedication had led to a meaningful acknowledgement that could shape her future. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that her work had mattered, and that her character had been seen and valued. The grandfather retired to his study, feeling content. He had watched her grow in influence and recognition, and he had seen the transformation in the grandson and the household. He knew that the decision to include her in the inheritance was not just about wealth, but about acknowledging the rare qualities she embodied: intelligence, empathy, patience, and integrity. Her presence had enriched the family in ways that money could never measure. That night, she sat by the window, gazing at the stars above. She thought about the lessons of patience, quiet strength, and dedication that had guided her. She reflected on the changes in the household, the respect she had earned, and the recognition that was now part of her life. Yet, she remained grounded, focused on the values that had always guided her actions. She knew that her journey was not over, but that she had taken a significant step forward, and that her efforts had created lasting impact. The grandson, in his own room, contemplated the events of the day. He understood the depth of his misjudgment and felt gratitude for the lessons he had learned. He had witnessed the quiet power of patience, integrity, and intelligence, and he recognized that true value often lay hidden beneath appearances. He felt a sense of respect and admiration, knowing that her influence had transformed not only the household but also his own perspective. The household settled into the calm of night, each member reflecting on the day's events. She completed her final tasks, ensuring that everything was in order before resting. The mansion, once a place of rigid routine and unnoticed efforts, now reflected the quiet wisdom and steady influence she had brought into every corner. Her impact was visible, not in loud gestures or demands, but in the harmony, efficiency, and respect that had grown throughout the household. As she prepared for sleep, she felt a sense of peace. Her work had always been guided by integrity, patience, and care, and now those qualities had been recognized in a meaningful way. She understood that true value was shown through consistent actions and the quiet dedication to doing what was right. She closed her eyes, knowing that her journey of influence, recognition, and growth was only beginning, and that her character would continue to shape the lives of those around her. The grandfather, satisfied with the day's outcome, reflected on the rare and valuable qualities she had demonstrated. He knew that her inclusion in the inheritance was a recognition of more than just work. It was a testament to her intelligence, kindness, and steady character. The grandson, now fully aware of the lessons she had taught him, felt a renewed sense of humility and appreciation, understanding that true worth could not be measured by title or status. And so, as the mansion rested under the quiet night sky, she lay in her room, content and thoughtful. She had earned recognition not by demanding it, but by living with integrity, patience, and intelligence. The household had changed around her. The grandson had learned to see beyond assumptions, and the grandfather's wisdom had guided the acknowledgement of her true worth. Her story was now fully recognized, a testament to the quiet power of character, dedication, and unwavering grace.